Trump thought he could take down Jasmine Crockett on live television, but within minutes, everything turned upside down. Jasmine pulled out each document, each number magnified on screen, each recording sounded like a knife cutting into his credibility. What happened next sent him running from the studio, private prison stocks crashing, ICE agents turning on him. Veterans stood up and applauded as the president fled. This was no longer an interview. It was a direct political battle, where truth brought down power in front of the eyes of the public. The confrontation not only shattered the image of power, but also exposed the truth to a level that could not be covered up. And now let's find out about this dramatic confrontation that no one dares to tell. The red light snapped on and the room tightened. Anderson Cooper faced the camera. With the steady voice people leaned toward in a storm. He laid out the case of Carlos Martinez, Vietnam vet, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, picked up by ICE while dropping his granddaughter at school. A shaky cell phone clip rolled, a child crying, an agent saying, "We'll sort it out later." A grandfather led away. Anderson added the timeline. 72 hours in detention. Lawyers scrambling. An 8-year-old waiting at home. 75 million people were watching, and you could feel it in the way no one dared cough. The control room went quiet enough to hear headsets crackle. Cooper turned to the stage and asked the simplest question. How does a decorated veteran end up in a cage? He looked at the president first, then at the Congresswoman, and then back to the camera like he knew a fuse had already been lit. Trump didn't take the fuse. He tried to change the map. He praised the best border security and said mistakes happen, but are rare. Then he pivoted hard and aimed at Jasmine Crockett. He hit the line twice for effect. Public defender, as if the job title was a verdict by itself. He painted her district as chaos and said she'd never worn a uniform, so she had no right to question how he kept America safe. He bragged about doing more for veterans than any president and told people to ask any veteran, like the answer was already settled. The crowd in the studio didn't clap. This wasn't that kind of show, and the silence felt heavier for it. A floor shoe scuffed, a boom pole adjusted, and even that sounded loud. Trump leaned back like a fighter certain he'd landed the clean shot, and for a second the air went still. Jasmine didn't look at him. She looked at Anderson, calm enough that the boom operator raised her channel. She clicked her pen once and wrote 3 words on her pad. She reached for the black portfolio that had been sitting there since the open. The clasp clicked, sharp and final, and a few heads turned toward the sound without meaning to. Her voice stayed low, like she was talking to a jury in a small room. "You said you've done more for veterans than any president," she said. "Let's examine that claim with evidence." She lifted the first document into the light, and somewhere off camera a producer whispered, "Stand by, Zoom." Crockett held up the first sheet. The yellow highlight glowed under the studio lights. Section 4, Paragraph C of Executive Order, 14,226. Anderson read the line out loud for the audience. Reallocation of facility resources to maximize detention capacity through private contractors. Crockett didn't need to explain what that meant. It was right there in plain English. Permission to pack more people into private detention centers with no oversight. Trump shifted in his seat, his smile tightening. But she didn't pause. She laid down the next document, a stack of contracts showing $1.22 billion flowing into 3 companies almost overnight. American Detention Solutions, Patriot Holding Corporation, Freedom Facilities Management, she said clearly, her voice steady as a metronome. Then came the kicker. Federal Election Commission reports showing the CEOs of those companies had given $47 million to Trump's campaign. For a moment, even the studio air seemed heavier, as if everyone knew what they just heard wasn't an accident. She tapped her tablet and the monitor behind them lit up with a pie chart. The colors told the story fast. 73% of ICE detainees with no criminal record, 18% with only traffic violations, 5% with only minor offenses, percent with minor misdemeanors, and just 4%, only 4%, were serious criminals. "This is not rare, Mr. President," she said. "This is systematic." In the control room, a producer muttered into his headset, "Everything checks out." All public records, a live ticker crawled across the bottom of the screen confirming dates, figures, and sources. Trump leaned forward and tried to wave it away. Fake news, all fake numbers, he snapped. But the ticker kept updating in real time. Confirmed, EO 14,226 signed March 15th. Confirmed, 1.22 billion awarded April 12th. Confirmed, FEC filings May 5th. The audience at home saw the facts appear as he denied them. And for the first time that night, Trump looked less like the fighter in control and more like the man backed into a corner. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She lifted a worn leather book with a ribbon marking the page. The spine read American Legal History, 1700 to 1900. She read slowly, every word clear. All good citizens are hereby commanded to aid and assist in capturing any person suspected of being a fugitive. She looked up. Suspected, not proven. Then she held up a printed copy of ICE's 2024 Enforcement Guidelines. Agents are authorized to detain individuals suspected of unlawful presence, based on reasonable indicators, including but not limited to physical appearance. The comparison landed like a hammer. 1,850 and 2,024, both using the same word, appearance. Anderson Cooper leaned in, eyebrows raised, but Crockett didn't let the silence stretch. The language has barely changed in 174 years. The only thing that's changed is the badge on the door. She tapped her tablet and the screen behind them switched from black and white text to full-color images of Maple Avenue in Dallas. First slide 6 months ago. Cafes, markets, families walking with strollers. Then the next slide, shuttered storefronts, graffiti, for lease signs. She read from a letter written by Jim Thompson, a veteran and Trump voter whose hardware store had just closed. I survived the recession, survived Amazon, but I couldn't survive ICE raids scaring away my customers. You killed my American dream to catch dishwashers and busboys. Crockett's voice carried no anger, only the blunt ache of someone repeating a truth too obvious to ignore. The silence in the studio was no longer tense. It was heavy. Finally, she swiped to a new slide, a U.S. map splashed with arrest data. Bright red circles clustered over cities like Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, Chicago. Cities with large black and brown populations. Cities led by Democratic mayors. Another graphic appeared beside it, showing a sharp drop in border arrests and felony arrests. The studio ticker lit up across the bottom of the screen. Source: DOJ/DHS Public Data, April to August 2024. In the control room, a producer whispered, "All verified." At home, viewers saw the map, the ticker, the numbers side by side with Trump's denials. Crockett turned back to him. This isn't about security. This is about targeting communities for how they look and who they vote for. For the first time, Trump didn't just look cornered, he looked rattled. The sound that came next wasn't polished video or a chart with clean lines. It was the voice of a 4-year-old girl, trembling, pleading. "I want my mommy. I've been good. Please, I want my mommy." The words echoed through the studio, tinny from a recording, but raw enough to freeze everyone where they sat. Camera operators stopped moving. The boom pole dipped into the frame. In the control room, nobody breathed. You could hear only the hum of machines. Crockett explained that Amy Rodriguez's mother, a nurse, had been arrested at her hospital shift. The child hadn't seen her in 6 weeks. Trump leaned forward, trying to grab back the rhythm. "Isolated case, fake sob story, numbers don't lie," he barked, but his voice cracked on fake. The screen still showed Amy's name in handwriting, scrawled across a coloring sheet, and nothing Trump said seemed to touch it. Then Crockett shifted the weight. She didn't raise her tone. She looked him in the eye and asked, "What if it were your daughter? What if Ivanka was shopping with her child, speaking in the accent she learned from her mother, and an ICE agent decided she didn't look American enough? What if your granddaughter watched her dragged away?" The silence hit like a body blow. Trump's mouth opened, then closed. His chest rose once, twice. "Off camera," his aide mouthed words, urging him to speak. 31 seconds ticked by. Anderson glanced at the clock. The producer counted the gap under his breath. 31 seconds of dead air on live television, the president frozen. When he finally lurched to his feet, it was only to leave. This is an ambush. I don't have to listen to this. He stormed off, Secret Service trailing. The door slammed so loud the boom mic shook. Anderson Cooper didn't flinch. He turned back to the camera, voice calm but tight. Ladies and gentlemen, the president has left the interview. We still have time, and the American people deserve answers. Crockett adjusted her chair and nodded. We continue. In Cooper's earpiece, a producer's voice cut in, urgent. Legal team wants VA memo verified now. Run it through standards immediately on screen, though. None of that showed. Viewers only saw a congresswoman sitting steady, a journalist leaning in a country realizing the night had just changed. Crockett didn't waste time. She pulled out a document marked confidential in red, the kind of stamp that makes people lean forward. This is a memo from your own VA secretary, she said, sliding it under the camera. Dated April 30th, it orders the reallocation of $847 million from veteran mental health programs, PTSD treatment, suicide prevention, substance abuse counseling, into ICE operations. The signature was there in black ink. That's not policy, she added. That's theft from our veterans. Anderson read the subject line out loud, his voice flat. Reallocation of mental health funding to immigration enforcement. The control room lit up with chatter. Everyone knew this was more than an interview now. Suddenly, a producer's headset buzzed. We've got a call. White House counsel, live to standards. The voice on the other end was hard, clipped. This is defamatory. Pull the feed or we'll sue CBS and every affiliate carrying this. Sponsors will walk. You'll lose hundreds of millions, standards and practices pushed back. We're airing public documents. It's covered under fair report privilege. Anti-SLAPP shields us if you try. The counsel snapped, you'll regret this, before the line went dead. In the control room, the air was electric. They had just stared down the White House in real time, and the cameras never stopped rolling. Then another voice broke in, this time from a different line patched into the studio. This is Agent Williams. ICE. I need to speak. The producer scrambled, confirming his identity off-air. His voice came distorted, digitally altered to hide him. I've been ordered to meet quotas. Emails from my supervisor. We need 50 arrests by Friday. Don't care if they're jaywalkers. That's real. I have the emails. Anderson's eyes widened as the first page popped up on the monitor. Subject line, weekly targets. The line at the bottom was clear. 50 by Friday, make it happen. Williams added, we're told to focus on minority neighborhoods. Avoid the suburbs. It's about optics. The words landed heavier than any chart. As Crockett leaned back, letting the moment breathe, Anderson pressed his earpiece. Update, the producer said. DHS Inspector General just confirmed they're opening an immediate review. VAIG 2. They want the memo and the emails. They want everything. Anderson looked back at the camera. Ladies and gentlemen, this story is already moving beyond this studio. Viewers at home didn't need a narrator to tell them. The dam wasn't just cracking anymore. It had burst. The interview wasn't even over when the internet exploded. On Twitter, the phrase Trump himself had thrown out, "Ask any veteran," turned against him. Within an hour, hashtag #AskAnyVeteran was the #1 trend worldwide. Videos poured in, Marines holding up their VA denial letters, nurses in uniform talking about canceled PTSD sessions, families holding up folded flags. By midnight, both the American Legion and the Veterans of Foreign Wars, groups that almost never wade into politics, issued statements calling for an immediate investigation into the allegations raised on air. For veterans groups to break neutrality that fast was unheard of, and it sent a shockwave through Washington. Wall Street picked it up next. Just after midnight, CNBC ran a bright red banner across the bottom of the screen. Detention trade unwinds. Core Civic stock was already down double digits in after-hours trading. GEO Group had halted transactions twice before the exchanges even opened. Jim Cramer, usually full of jokes, looked spooked as he told viewers, "I've never seen private prison stocks in freefall like this." The market's saying one thing, the risk is real. Investors weren't waiting for hearings. They were bailing out in real time. Inside ICE itself, the fracture lines split wide. A group of veteran officers circulated an open letter online. They said they joined ICE after 9/11 to protect the country, not to chase quotas and rip families apart. "We signed up to catch terrorists, not nurses," one line read. By dawn, over 300 signatures had appeared on the letter, many from agents with 20 years of service. They called for a moratorium on arrests until Congress could review the executive order. Younger recruits pushed back, loyal to the administration, and for the first time, the agency looked openly divided. The most decisive blow came not from Twitter or Wall Street, but from a courthouse filing. Just after 3 a.m., the Texas Attorney General's office announced it had filed for a temporary restraining order in federal court to block parts of Executive Order 14,226, specifically the sections authorizing resource reallocation and appearance-based detentions. Within minutes, news tickers updated. State AG seeks TRO against ICE detention order. The case was expedited and a hearing was set for the next morning. It was the first time in decades that a state AG had moved overnight against a sitting president's executive order. To viewers still glued to their screens, it was clear. What started as an interview was now a national crisis unraveling in real time. By sunrise, the political map had already shifted. In Austin, cameras crowded into the governor's mansion for an emergency press conference. What no one expected was to see three governors standing side by side, two Republicans and a Democrat. The Republican governor of Texas, the Democrat from California, and another Republican from Ohio all delivered the same message. Effective immediately, their states would suspend cooperation with ICE unless federal guarantees were made that legal residents and citizens would no longer be swept up. The sight of rival parties on one stage, united against Washington, was rare enough to feel historic. Reporters shouted questions about politics, but the Texas governor cut them off. "This is not about left or right. This is about protecting our citizens." The pressure reached the Pentagon within hours. Recruitment offices were already reporting cancellations. Parents called commanders asking why their children should serve if veterans could be detained back home. At the morning briefing, senior generals looked grim. A memo from the Judge Advocate General circulated, warning that wrongful detention of veterans could create liability for the Department of Defense itself, especially if service members feared post-retirement risks. "If soldiers lose trust in the government's promise to care for them after service," the JAG officer wrote, "our ability to recruit and retain is compromised." The note was blunt. The military's pipeline of volunteers was on the line. By mid-afternoon, the crisis took on a new layer of formality. In federal court, the Texas Attorney General's petition for a temporary restraining order was granted. The judge's ruling was measured but firm. Sections of Executive Order 14,226 dealing with appearance-based detention and reallocation of VA resources were paused. DHS was ordered to respond within 72 hours with evidence justifying those provisions. News tickers rolled the update across every screen in America. Federal court blocks, parts of ICE order, demands DHS answer in 72 hours. For the first time, the president's sweeping authority on immigration had been checked in real time, and the countdown clock toward a showdown had already begun. By the early hours of the morning, the president was back on his phone. At 2:37 a.m., a string of tweets hit the timeline, each angrier than the last. Fake veterans, paid actors, the nutjob Congresswoman wasn't even born here. Where's her birth certificate? Another post called the interview a deep state ambush and warned networks they'd be held accountable. The spelling errors and frantic pace made it clear. This was not a calculated response, but raw fury poured straight into the feed. Screenshots of the posts spread instantly, hashtags flipped against him, and even longtime supporters privately admitted the tone sounded desperate. Crockett's team, however, wasn't just playing defense. By mid-morning, they filed a formal complaint with the Federal Election Commission. The documents allege that the three private prison CEOs, whose companies had just secured $1.22 billion in ICE contracts, had engaged in bundling, routing donations through shell packs to funnel $47 million into the president's re-election war chest. The filing included wire transfers, matching dates, and even email chains referencing contract day celebrations. Reporters seized on the phrase. Within hours, hashtag contract day was trending alongside Hashtag Ask Any Veteran, fueling the sense of corruption and payoff. The markets, already shaky, got another jolt when the Securities and Exchange Commission quietly opened a probe into trading patterns before the contracts were announced. Several hedge funds with ties to administration insiders had dumped rival detention stocks and bought heavy into Core Civic and GEO Group days before the executive order. The timing was too perfect. CNBC broke in with the headline, SEC investigating possible insider trading tied to detention contracts. Investors who had held on through the first wave of panic now bolted, accelerating the collapse of the industry's value. Late in the afternoon, another shoe dropped. The Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section sent voluntary interview requests to several of the president's aides. The topic, whether ICE raids had been directed for political purposes. No subpoenas yet, but the signal was unmistakable. The system was moving. Headlines rolled across every major outlet. FEC, SEC, DOJ probe detention scandal. What started as a live interview was now unraveling into full-blown legal warfare, with battle lines drawn not just in politics, but in courtrooms and financial markets. At dawn the next Monday, parents walking their kids to Rosa Parks Elementary stopped in their tracks. In front of the gates stood a line of veterans in faded uniforms, boots planted, arms crossed. Some carried flags, others just wore their medals. At the center was Marcus Johnson, a former Army Ranger, his voice steady as he spoke to local reporters. We protected freedom abroad. Now we're protecting our kids at home. No one gets dragged out of here without a judge's order. Hours later, the city council passed an emergency rule. No local agency would cooperate with federal detentions unless ICE produced a warrant signed by a federal judge. The language was plain, but its effect was revolutionary. No warrant, no help. By the end of the day, the ripple had reached the city's churches and civic groups. At St. Mary's, the pastor stood with immigration lawyers and unveiled a new sanctuary protocol. Volunteers were trained, legal hotlines posted, and every step reviewed by attorneys to ensure the protection held up in court. Other organizations followed, turning gyms, union halls, and even libraries into safe zones. This isn't civil disobedience, one lawyer explained. It's civil defense. For families already living in fear, the sight of neighbors preparing legal shields was as powerful as the veterans on the school steps. But confrontation wasn't far. That evening, a convoy of ICE SUVs pulled onto Maple Avenue, lights flashing. Agents in tactical gear moved toward a house without presenting paperwork. Local police arrived within minutes, led by the city's police chief. Cameras rolled as the chief demanded to see a warrant and ordered all agents to turn on body cameras. The ICE commander hesitated, waving a clipboard that carried no judge's signature. Not good enough, the chief said flatly. You're not operating in my city without a warrant. The standoff played out in real time across social media, the images of federal agents forced to back down, burning across television screens nationwide. By nightfall, Congress had taken notice. In Washington, the House Judiciary Committee announced an emergency hearing, complete with subpoena power, to demand all ICE contract records linked to Executive Order 14,226. The statement was short but thunderous. We will compel production of every dollar, every email, every instruction tied to this policy. The camera lights outside the Capitol blazed as anchors told viewers that a local standoff had just triggered a national reckoning. What began with veterans standing guard at a school was now moving to the very heart of legislative power. The House chamber was packed wall to wall. Cameras rolled as the Judiciary Committee called its first witness, an ICE whistleblower who played a recording that crackled through the speakers. The voice was unmistakable. Trump's. I need those detention numbers up. The election is coming. Make them hurt. Focus on Democrat cities. Gasps rippled across the room. Committee members leaned forward while the president's lawyers leapt to their microphones. They argued the tape was protected by executive privilege, that no internal communications could be forced into daylight. But the chairman shot back. Privilege is not a shield for political abuse. That afternoon, a federal judge delivered a ruling that cut through decades of precedent. There is no executive privilege when the evidence concerns potential abuse of power for partisan gain, the opinion read. With that, DHS was ordered to produce a tranche of emails linking campaign staff to ICE raid directives. Within hours, reporters were quoting subject lines, "Detention numbers equals poll numbers," and "Target Dallas for maximum coverage." The paper trail was undeniable, and it reached straight into the West Wing. The fallout came fast. A bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced the Veterans and Citizens Protection Act. The bill didn't just stop VA funds from being siphoned into immigration raids, it added strict reforms. ICE agents required to wear body cameras on every operation, quotas for arrests banned outright, and a fast-track habeas process so that any citizen wrongly detained could be released within 24 hours. The measure was sweeping, but the mood on Capitol Hill had shifted. Democrats and Republicans alike didn't want to be seen as standing against veterans. The White House tried to fight back. Trump vetoed the bill in a primetime address, calling it weak on crime and a gift to MS-13. But less than a week later, Congress returned with a crushing override, 318 to 48 in the House, 89 to 11 in the Senate. It was the most bipartisan rebuke of a sitting president in decades. As the override news broke, markets moved again. Core Civic and GEO, already crippled, saw their federal contracts canceled overnight. Their stock collapsed to pennies. Investors wrote off billions, and the detention industry that had fueled the scandal was left in ruins. For the first time, the machinery of law had swung harder than politics, and the message was clear. The institutions would not be used as weapons without consequence. The aftermath came in waves, each one more permanent than the last. The Inspector General, together with the DOJ, released an interim report within 60 days. It confirmed what whistleblowers and families had said on live television. Detention numbers were inflated, statistics doctored, and arrests disproportionately targeted communities of color. Several mid-level ICE supervisors were indicted for fabricating stats and violating civil rights. Mugshots of bureaucrats who had once sat comfortably in Washington offices now flashed across news broadcasts, a reminder that accountability had finally reached inside the agency. Reform came next. Congress forced ICE to establish a brand new accountability division, led by none other than Agent Patricia Williams, the same whistleblower who had risked her career by speaking out. Her first move was radical in its simplicity. A public-facing dashboard updated weekly, showing every detention by category, by district, by justification. Families and journalists could see the numbers for themselves. Quotas were banned, warrants required, and body cam footage became mandatory. For the first time, ICE operated in daylight, not shadows. Meanwhile, Maple Avenue in Dallas told a different kind of story. The boarded shops slowly reopened. Jim Thompson's hardware store put out a new sign, "All Americans Welcome." Mrs. Kim's Market restocked shelves. The Ethiopian coffee shop hung a banner, "Open again." The street buzzed with families, kids, and veterans who came back not just as customers, but as guardians of the community. 6 months later, on the site of a former detention center, the Martinez Veterans Center was dedicated. Carlos Martinez cut the ribbon in his dress blues, his granddaughter Emma at his side. The same man who had once been handcuffed in front of his granddaughter was now honored as the face of resilience. Crockett spoke quietly at that ceremony. Her words carried more by weight than volume. The truth doesn't win by itself. It only wins because people are willing to pay the price to bring it into the light. Around her, veterans saluted, children played, families clasped hands. The scandal that started with one arrest had forced the country to look at itself and choose. And in that choice lay the lesson. Institutions don't save themselves. People do. If this story gripped you, don't let it stop here. Hit like if you believe the truth should always come to light. Share this video so more people can see how power can be challenged when evidence speaks louder than words. And if you want to follow more stories like this, where real confrontation, real courage, and real consequences play out, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter.